Well, dude, let's just jump right in. So you got something you want to talk about? Let's hear about it.
Yeah, this is our second kind of conversation like this. When you asked what was I thinking about, the one thing that's been kind of on my mind recently is John 14. So if you don't mind, I'll just kick things off with a little bit of John 14. I think John's like one of the most. It's my favorite gospel. I don't know if you have a favorite
Hmm.
gospel, but John is definitely the one I go to most. So this is Jesus, and he's talking to his disciples, and it's got me thinking about stuff. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will always be with me where I am, and you know the way to where I'm going. No, we don't know, Lord, Thomas said. We have no idea where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. If you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus replied, Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father who lives in me does his work through me. Just believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or at least believe because of the work you've seen me do. I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done, and even greater works, because I am going to be with the Father. You can ask for anything in my name, and I will do it, so that the Son can bring glory to the Father. Yes, ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. And what I've been thinking about here, and what I texted you about, was um, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And, we talked last time about how it seems like we're living in this reality where heaven, the kingdom of heaven, is kind of breaking into the present reality of our life here. And that we live in this kind of in-between space where the kingdom is advancing and yet it is not here in its fullness. And so when I think about becoming like the Father, mapping my life onto the reality of a resurrected Christ in this life, and living out the reality that Jesus, Yeshua, is the way, the truth, and the life. My question that have been thinking about is, like, where am I seeing evidence of that? What's the evidence that I see in my life that Christ is the way to the Father? And if you think about that, like, what's that mean? No one comes to the Father but by me. As I think about, well, if I come to the Father, maybe it's something like no one becomes like the Father except that they map their life onto the reality of Jesus. No one comes to the Father except by me. And so he is the way. He is the way to this transcendent reality of living for the Father, living as the Son. And so I was thinking about, like, where do I see that reality? Like, because if we're talking about, yes, the kingdom of heaven in real life actually makes itself manifest and breaks into our present day reality. It's like it captures our attention. It something captures our attention and reveals to us that here is a piece of evidence that the kingdom of heaven is present in this reality. And we don't see it all the time. We're not always attending to it, but there's times that just jump out and they grab you and they grip you and they kind of grab you by the shirt collar and say, do you see that the kingdom of heaven is actually breaking out into this present day reality? And are you paying attention? And I think the more of those kinds of collar shaking encounters that we have, where our attention is just grabbed by the reality of a resurrected Christ living like in this present day reality in this kingdom of heaven. And it's like, I mean, we don't have to go very far into John 14 to see something just truly psychedelic, which is in verse 12. I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done and even greater works. And it kind of lines up with this idea that, like, well, where am I seeing this reality? Where am I noticing this? And it strikes me that if it's true what Jesus said about that we are going to do works like he has done, even greater works, then it must mean that when we live our life according to the way or in the way, when we live the way, that there's really no limit on the potential for us to transform into something like the Father, something like Jesus. I don't think we know the limits of human transformation when someone is living in the way and has the light and lives the truth. It's that there's no cap on, and obviously Jesus, when we think about Jesus and how we don't see the works that he did in our own life, we think of the supernatural, raising the dead, healing the sick, all of that. And I think as followers of the way, I've been wanting to pay attention and notice what the evidence is for the fact that this risen Christ is alive today, and that his kingdom is making itself known, announcing itself and manifesting itself in our present day reality. I'm talking about in the bits and bobs, in the atoms and the molecules and the subatomic particles and the energies and the relationships and everything of our space-time reality that we are in. I'm talking about the kingdom of heaven actually breaking into that in a real physical, spiritual, and emotional way, in a way that's as real as anything that you can put your hands on. And I think that's one of the things I've been kind of trying to pay attention to. I was curious if you noticed that in your life too.
Yeah, if it's true, then that would align with the Bible's emphasis on the dignity of life, the meaning of life, and not just like the meaning of a life lived through to the end and then died, but like the meaning of life as we live it, the meaning of the moments. It seems to me that the Bible puts a lot of meaning on the moments that we might miss in our sort of go mentality.
Mm.
And so if what you're saying is true, it would align with these like underlying principles that the Bible does seem to be talking about, because it would also explain why the Bible doesn't seem to like be positing very much at all that like the richest man is the best, or the one who gives the most money somehow had it figured out, or the one who really is successful in any of the ways we tend to think of success. It doesn't really seem to go there.
Mm-mm.
It seems to talk more about like how you think about things and your experience of things and what you believe and how you can find true meaning in life. And even it talks a lot about like the things that last. Like we don't have to look very far in the Bible for it to be saying pretty clearly, just straight up, like these are the things that are going to actually last,
Yeah.
and these are the things that are not. And it's interesting how we sort of like gravitate, naturally maybe to like maybe it's, I don't know, was it always like this, or is it kind of our current society? I'm not really sure. Although I don't, maybe it kind of was always like this. It feels like it probably was, because it seems like this was it back in the Bible too. Is like, it seems like we have a little bit of a drift towards like thinking the things that really don't matter that much are the most important things, and like sometimes missing the things that actually do matter the most. And also,
Yeah,
I was thinking recently about how like what you said is, sometimes these things in life kind of do grab you by the shirt collars and are like, do you see this? This is right in front of you. I'm not going to let you miss one. And then also, it seems like a lot of it you can pass over if you're not paying attention. And I wonder if that's partly what it's talking about, like the still small voice. Like if you're going to
yep, yep.
go through life without any sort of awareness of the wonder that might be around you, you're probably going to miss it. It's not always going to like force itself on you. Now, I think there's like crossroads in life, and like those are the moments where like it gets in your face sometimes.
I'm so
But
glad you
also,
said that.
yeah,
There are times, I would say most of the time, these moments don't announce themselves that way. They are the still
hmm
small voice. They're the little, the quiet, the things that are found in the quiet. And I think learning to tune into that expands our perception of it and expands the actual presence of it in our life when we notice it and we attend to it and the things that we water
yeah,
grow, and that's like noticing where love is at work, noticing where the kingdom of heaven is advancing and presenting itself in those still small ways. Absolutely. And then sometimes it just like crashes into your reality and it's just like, hey, dude, like take note.
exactly. And look, it was already happening in verse 5. Isn't that interesting? How is it Thomas there? He's like, okay, what's the way? I don't know the way. Show me the way. And even then, Jesus is like, no, I am the way. Like
Yeah.
there does seem to be something in us that's so like tactical. Like,
Yeah.
show us what to do, we'll do it. Show us where we're going, we want to go there. It's so tactical,
Yeah.
and and but maybe what that is partly too is like maybe that falls in line with the I guess what I'm saying is we tend to be so tactical we sometimes miss like what's actually going on around us, and that would fall in line with it also seems like the scripture keeps has to remind us like to well, it tells us, like these are things of the spirit. These are things that are spiritual. You have to have spiritual eyes to see them,
Yeah.
um and maybe that could be kind of the what it's talking about there. But yeah, I'm curious, Patrick, when you think about this, I guess the thing I think of like first with this is I kind of feel like no good deed goes unpunished, like in the best way,
Mm.
and that ultimately you should, the goal should be to live in integrity and congruence with yourself. And that's going to need to be derived from, I guess, your understanding of God. So, I mean, you could also say in congruence with yourself and with God. Um, and that is actually sort of the thing that matters the most, and it's not actually the most important thing about what other people think of you,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the reason that I think that that's pretty key is because then when you do the right thing and no one notices you, there's something in you, if you're thinking about it the right way, there's something in you that is fine with that, because this is not about being noticed in the moment. That really has no particular substantial lasting value. You
Yeah.
just like made a deposit in the forever bank somehow,
Mhm.
and when you do little things that maybe don't get noticed at all, uh, or that are hard, when you align yourself in those ways, it's sort of like a resonance with the good that is out there, the good that's around us, or somehow it like it's like you were just part of building something. You just
Yeah.
built like you built good a little bit more, and that's not going to go back. It's not going to go down. We're not going to lose that. I don't know.
Well,
Somehow just sort of like the building of good towards things that are eternal.
yeah, I'm glad you said that because it kind of gets at the way God made us. When you think about your incentive reward system that's in your brain, with the dopamine and serotonin, oxytocin, and all of this, that orients you towards doing certain things. And if I understand it correctly, it's the dopaminergic system is oriented to it rewards you and makes you feel good, makes you experience and perceive of that kind of resonance with reality. That that announces itself, or that releases when you notice that you're making progress towards a goal that you value. And in some ways, the more valued and specific the goal, and the more that you notice your progress towards it, the greater the reward that the dopaminergic system releases to your brain, and the more that you feel and experience that resonance that you talked about, which is that you notice that you're depositing something in you notice that you're making progress towards something that you value. In other words, that's not that different from making an internal deposit, let's say. And so it's cool how God made us to, like, and the way I think about it is, okay, what's the goal then? Well, at its highest level, and the highest goal that anyone could have, technically speaking, is to map their life onto the highest example that you could come up with, the best story that you can tell, the best, most transcendent hero tale that you could come up with, or that you could tell. And in Jesus, you have that limit story. It's the story of the worst thing happening to the best person, and then they prevailed over that, and in doing so, they represented this. Here's what it's like to be fully human, fully alive. This is the way. I am the way, the truth, the life. And so when your goal is to be that and live that life, and then you do the things that are like, when you see that you're doing the things, even in the quiet, there's nobody rewarding you for it in the moment, but your brain is built to reward you for doing the things, the little things, sweeping the floor when nobody's watching, wiping down the counter, and cleaning out the sink for your wife, and going the extra mile and doing the things that no one's going to take note of or praise you for, but and you see that it's evidence of you becoming more like that highest thing that you can possibly map your life onto. And going back to the idea of that there's no limit to human transformation, I think that's the path, that's the way, is like when we get up each day and we seek to map our lives onto the reality of that resurrected Christ, like what higher aim could you have? Like even just in a technical, non-religious way, like describe it, right? Is the aim to have the most money, or the most power, or the most sex, or the most what? Well, what if all of those are potential aims, but they aren't all the highest aim, because they're not like, what's the highest? What's the best thing that we can come up with? Well, it's something that's good for me today, and good for me tomorrow, and good for the whole community of people that I am connected to today and tomorrow and across time. That whatever path that is, for me to live a life that is good for that community of people across time, that's an impossibly narrow way. And it's like, this is the way. It's the only way to do that. The only way to live your life in a way that's good, that's loving, love your neighbor as yourself. The only way to do that in a way that's, and Jamie George says that he thinks of love as the highest in me wants what's best for you. Well, you might be able to develop a goal or an aim or a way that is good for you in 10 years, but it might not be good for the people around you in 10 years, and it might not be good for you in 5 years. It might not be good for you in 20 years, but you could develop an aim that might be good but to develop a name that's good for you and is love, is the best of you revealing itself to the benefit of those around you and your community, both now and tomorrow and across time, iteratively. Like, that's an impossibly narrow way. That is the way. The only way to do that is the way, the truth, the life. And I think that's what Christ is talking about. And I think that's why we're made the way we're made. So it's like when we live that way, we have the highest aim that you could possibly come up with across any stories, time, domain, or anything. And your adventure in your life is to map yourself onto that reality. And your whole dopaminergic system, your whole body is built to perceive of the kingdom of heaven breaking forth into your life when you map yourself onto that reality. And that's how we're healed. That's how I think when we see things, to the extent that we see anything that looks like glory, anything that looks like you can ask for anything in my name and I will do it. When we see any of that happening, it's because we're on the way. And, that's an impossibly narrow way, and few there are that find it. Broad is the road to destruction, right? It's like broad is the road that leads to short-term gain, short-term pleasure, etc., but long-term distress, long-term collapse. Like, the way to being healed and being whole and having the shalom, the thing that you want in your life, that feeling of peace and that feeling of meaning, deep meaning, now and across time, is like found in this impossibly narrow way of the resurrected Christ.
Okay, so here's what stands out to me just at this point, and then I want to hear and talk a lot more about the way. But just as like a preliminary, Patrick, this is what's really standing out to me right now, and it's actually an area that I have a growing impatience with traditional conservative Christianity in this area in particular, which is the separation of my belief in Christ as salvation and creation. These things are not separate. These things are integrated. To put it another way, the separation of, my belief in God and how I go about my life or how I think about my body. There's, for some reason, it seems like the more sort of religious or distinctive one's theological viewpoints are, or the more, I guess, I hate to use the word traditional, or the more conservative. Let me, I guess we may as well just speak plainly. It kind of seems like if you were to take like the world religions and graph it and then have kind of a spectrum of more conservative to less conservative, it kind of seems to me like, for most of them anyway, or certainly the Christian faith, is the more conservative you kind of get, the more you start to separate things. Would you agree with that? And I don't know why that is exactly, but
yeah, well,
it seems like.
Just real quick interjection on that, and I heard Jordan Peterson talk about this, and it makes sense, is that conservative people are really good at boundaries, and so they're better at separating things, maybe to a fault. People who are more liberal, that part of what that means to be more liberal is to have fewer boundaries and to not separate things as much. But carry on.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Look, that explains a lot. That makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that's where conservatives get hung up, is like they get hung up on, but you need separation, you need categories, because no categories whatsoever is just anxiety. It's just untrammeled chaos and anxiety. But you can also have too strong, too rigid a boundary, and too many of them, and boundaries between things that need to be separated.
That's right. And what I'm thinking about is like the one reading of this in the most kind of extreme, kind of separated sort of way is, you can read this and say, well, I don't know what there is to talk about in this verse. I am the way. Okay, he's talking about the way to salvation. He's the truth. Yeah, we need to believe the right things in life. That makes sense. And the life. Well, yeah, we need Jesus to have eternal life. Okay, boom. Now what are we talking about? What else is there left to talk about? That's not a very integrated sort of way of life. And even with what you were saying with the dopaminergic system and the serotonin levels and those types of things, that like when we do things that may not be the easiest, or they might be a little bit hard, they take just an ounce of discipline or just a little bit of deliberateness to do them. But when you do it, it feels good, and then that builds momentum in your life, and you can do more good things, and that feels good. And these things are all by design. They're all
Mm-hmm.
by design. and
Mm-hmm.
and I probably won't say the name right now, but hopefully in another month or two, certainly, we'll be ready to talk more about this. But Jericho said something about a week or two ago. It was a 2-word statement that he had that I think just needs to be turned into a brand, and it does integrate the spiritual and the physical in just such a good way that I think is like a little bit edgy and also catchy, and it says a lot, and it I guess also just a little bit like pokes in the eye of like, we are here physically and that's one thing, but then let's believe the right things so that one day it's all going to be good. And here's what it is, Patrick. We're just way more integrated than I think we would like to actually believe. I don't know why we don't like to believe it. I don't know why this is hard for us, but we are very integrated. We're integrated with each other. We're integrated with creation. We're integrated with the universe. There is a design to this whole thing. We have been designed. And
Mm-hmm.
when we live in accord with that design, things go better. Like that
Right.
is the way that is true life.
Yeah.
And this whole thing of like missing that, and just thinking God was good for creation, and then Jesus was good for salvation, and one day things are going to be good, and you know our bodies just are what they are, and we just sort of don't pay it any attention, is it's sort of bewildering.
Yeah. To make sense of that, I think you have to kind of go back to, some of the ideas of Plato. I see a lot of Platonic thought in modern kind of Christendom and in the Western worldview, and that's where you get the roots of that separation. Thinking that we're distinct from our physical realities, or that the physical is bad and the spiritual is good in some sense, and that there's this kind of bifurcation and all of that. And you go back to Jesus's time, the ancient people, they didn't really think that way. They didn't. That's kind of a more modern Western thought, is that we can ascend out of our physical reality, and that the true us is actually just this spiritual thing, that our soul, let's say, that's distinct from our physical reality. And then that leads us to thinking that, when we say, like, believe, what does it mean to believe, or what is the truth? We tend to think of that as meaning that we have our mental furniture arranged properly, that we have the correct data arranged properly in the right structure, and that makes us correct in a capital C kind of way, and that's actually what keeps us from burning in some future hell. So, and that's not, when, so the example that I like with this is the example that, the novelist Ted Decker gave me. Soon after I came to Christ, I had the fortune of joining my friend Paul Farmer and Ted Decker for what turned out to be a 2.5-hour lunch, where Ted revealed more of the mysteries of the universe to me. But he's a wild dude. He's literally jumping all around the restaurant, motioning and, scaring people while he was explaining things to me. But one of the things that he said was, do you know what an avocado tastes like? Think about that. Now tell me how an avocado tastes.
Yeah, I can't really.
I said, I can't really tell you, Ted. He's like, these are our limitations when it comes to talking about knowing God and knowing the way and the truth and the light. Like, the mental furniture that you have arranged up there in your head, the information, the data, the language, none of that is sufficient for you to tell me what an avocado tastes like. And it's not sufficient for you to tell me about God either, and what it's like to know God. And what he's getting at is that we think of the word to know as a kind of, well, like I said, we know data, we know information, we know facts. But when you know what an avocado tastes like, you're not knowing a set of facts. You know an experience of eating an avocado. And the fullness of that experience is to know what it tastes like. And there's so much of knowing God and walking with God that is like eating an avocado. It's like, I don't have language to tell you about what that's like. And I think about this limitation that we have, in particular, as we face the future of things like AI, augmented reality, virtual reality, wearable computers, implanted computers, connected to AI, and all of that. Because there's a lot of potential out there, and it could be incredibly good, or it could be incredibly bad, or it could be somewhere in between. But for those of us who seek to map our lives onto the reality of Christ, we have to think about how do we engage with technology in a way that is coherent with and consistent with the way of Christ. What I think of as, if Christ is the supreme example of what it means to be human, to be fully human, and I do think that's why Christ came, is so that God could say, hey, you missed the point. Here's what it means to be fully human. Live like this. Be like this. Here's your example. And so if we engage with technology and AI and all this stuff, we have to do it through the lens of being fully human. What does it look like to engage with this stuff and to be fully human? And there's a strong strain of this technological thinking that is that wants to supplant the human experience, that wants to have some kind of human plus, and that's why why you see some of that, but not all of it. Some of it's not that. But I think about, okay, how are we going to know the truth about AI? What's if I have to get the right information, hold the right information in my head and arrange it in the proper way to be correct, to be right, to know the truth about AI, what does that even mean? Or about wearables, or about implanted computers. And so the fact that Jesus is the truth, that the capital T truth isn't something that you know in that way. You don't know the truth in an easy to describe the categories and to tell you with language 100% the truth. That's not the way the truth works. The truth is more like we move forward through life and we encounter these things with our eyes wide open, and we speak the truth about what we see. And if we are aligned in love, if we are vibrating according to the patterns of love in our life, and we are orienting ourselves towards that transcendent goal, that aim of Christ, and then we speak the truth about what we see and about what we are experiencing and what the potential is for this to make us more or less human and all of that. It's like we live the truth in some way when we live that way. We discover the truth when we do that humbly. And that's what the Logos is. The Logos is the truth the creative, truthful speech in love. Like that's logos. And that's the same logos that's earlier in John when he says, in the beginning was the logos. In the beginning was the word. Let's just go to that. It's in John 1. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word, Logos, was with God, and the Word, Logos, was God. He existed in the beginning with him. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word, Logos, also the eternal Christ, gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness. So Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he is the Logos. Jesus is the truth, the capital T truth. And we're tempted to think that we can know the truth about AI, about any, well, from our background, there's a whole host of kind of moralistic and categorical decisions that we've believed are the truth and that we've known and we know and we're right and we're correct. And we've got the information properly arranged in our head, and that tells you who's in and who's out and who's not going to burn and who is and all that stuff. Like I think we've got it wrong. I think the way to live the truth isn't to capture the right information merely in your head and to be able to speak it out in a certain manner, but it's to live the reality of the truth. And that's only done through the Logos, through this eternal Spirit of Christ that is in us and that we're living into that reality. So, the idea that we can know these things and be right about them and know the truth, and it's like, that makes us soft and lazy because then we don't have to pay attention. And it gives us this idea that we've figured it out and we're right and everybody else is wrong. It's like, no, to know the truth is actually an ongoing process. And we better be pretty freaking humble about what we think we know and we don't know. And we better have our eyes wide open. And we better be willing to speak the absolute naked truth about what we see moving forward so that we can live the truth. Because there's so much out there that it's impossible to know the truth about. Our ancestors took a stand on technology 100 years ago, and they said, we're not crossing that line. They drew a line in the sand around 1900 and said, that's about all the technology for us. Thank you very much. And, and I look at things like implanting AI so that I can be smarter, faster, better, stronger. And that's going to be here in 10 years. Like that's, you'll have 10 to 20% of the population will have some kind of AI implanted chip in 20 years. And they'll be connected to some super intelligence, that makes ChatGPT look ignorant. And they're going to have some real advantages in the information space. And we're going to have to decide, like, am I going to merge with computer? Am I going to merge with the machine with my body? And what does it mean to do that? And what are the lines that I cross? And when do I merge my body with the machine? Have I already done that with my iPhone? Do I do that when I start wearing it on my wrist? Or do I do that when I wear it on my glasses? Or only when I implant it into my eye or into my brain? Like, what's it me merging with the computer? What does that mean for me being human? What does that mean for me thinking about creating the future? And it's like, we don't know the answers to any of those questions, and there's no way for us to know them categorically by just reading something and then knowing the right facts about them. The only way we can navigate that, and the only way we could come to some conclusion about whether or not to engage with that and how to engage with it, is through a day-by-day, humble, like, trying to keep your eyes wide open and speaking the naked truth about it, about what you see and what you're experiencing and where you see the patterns breaking out and where you see, things either moving in a more human direction or a less human direction, and then living that truth, living rather than trying to believe that you have the truth, that you can just, I'm good, thank you very much, like I'm right and you're wrong. So that's kind of the thing I've been thinking of as it relates to how do we move into the future in a way that leads us to a greater humanity, a more human version of our lives, more like Christ.
Well, see what you're saying about truth, and the one way to view truth as something that it just has to do with what you believe, and it's not essentially what you experience or are united with or in resonance with. If truth is just basically right thinking, then you can sort of use it to your advantage. You can sort of actually, in some way, sort of like rise above it a little bit. Like you can use it to serve you. But
Mm-hmm.
see, truth as something that you are actually more aligned with or united with makes a lot of sense, because the Bible talks about, you know, it talks about the sexual experience of a husband and wife as like knowing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And also, according to the Bible, marriage is like a metaphor for like the church at large's relationship with Christ. And so this idea that knowing is experiencing, or it's hard to like explain or exactly describe, but it's something that you are united with, makes a lot of sense. I mean, to me, there would be like precedent in the Bible. Like you could look other places in the Bible and have that reinforced, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's also why, one of the things I notice is how scientists are increasingly coming to God in some way. And I think it's because
Right.
as they peer into reality itself, the more closely they peer, if they're committed to telling the truth about what they find, it's going to point the same direction that this points, you know, and that's what they're
Yes,
finding.
that's exactly right. Yes, that is exactly right. And I think that's also partly why there's just becoming less and less atheists. I mean, you know, and I have heard that this is a broader trend. So I don't think this is just a product of my experience, but I have personally bumped into some people that I've known for some time that, you know, used to be pretty sure there was no God, and they might not have considered themselves an atheist or wanted to really define themselves in that way, but the net result of their sort of what they thought was going on was basically atheist. You know, there's not a God out there, and most of them at this point are like, well, I don't know exactly what's going on, but there's something out there. There is absolutely
Yeah,
something out there. This idea that there's nothing out there, and then bang, bang, we all arrived here somehow through some explosion. They're just like, this makes no sense. This is ludicrous. So I think
yeah,
that, and that's also why I, I don't tend to be scared of scientific advancements, and I don't understand why we would be. And even
right,
technology, the thing is, technology is the toughest thing with AI and technology is just that it becomes much easier to centralize power. That is the most sort of thing we should be keeping our wits about us on. I don't think it's so much that, you know, AI or the computers or the algorithms are going to, sort of like break our humanity or detract from our humanity. I mean, there's everything can be used for good or for evil, but I think that is something that as technology increases, that the ability to centralize power, just becomes more and more um, apt, you know, capable, powerful. I mean, you see this is happening already in China and has been for some time, but they've had sort of an authoritarian type of a, top down rule there for some time. And then as technology has advanced, they're using those technology advances for the same means that they have been. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's going to happen too for sure. But when you look at the arc of history, you know, to me it seems like even without the founders of these great tech companies and developments and innovations and breakthroughs, and even when the founders and the inventors and the revolutionaries and the you know the ones like advancing society in these ways, even when they don't really know what they're doing, I think that their work is still being used, you know by God essentially to Now, there's always the ability to use these things for good or for evil. And I'm not trying to like select one little app and say Snapchat was definitely, God's design. But these things are being, in the grand scheme of things, these things are being used to bring about development and even in some level human flourishing. Now, I'm not suggesting that Instagram is like the best thing that ever happened for human flourishing, but but it's easy to sort of hate on it, and 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 it does advance human flourishing. I mean, Baked and Free is one tiny little example. It survives off of Instagram. And there's way better examples than that. I mean, that's just a little tiny one. I mean, there's big businesses based on Instagram. Like people making a shit ton of money that, and then that gets used for good and or evil. I mean, it's either way. But if you look at like life now versus 300 years ago, just 300 years ago, I mean, life is better now for more people than it was 300 years ago. It's easy to hate on some of these technological advancements, and I think it's just as easy to sort of miss the big picture of what's happening here. And to me, it seems like in general, technology over time is still becoming subservient to the growing development of the human race, essentially.
Hmm. So my kind of I would definitely agree that there's been a huge advancement in human flourishing as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the technological revolution, the information revolution. And now, what remains to be seen is whether the intelligence revolution will also, because intelligence is going to become as ubiquitous as information is today. And, I, I don't have any reason to believe that that doesn't lead to human flourishing. Let me be clear. But I think the thing that kind of beckons to me is that we kind of went down a path. You go back to the Enlightenment, let's say, and the emergence of science and all of that. And I think that all comes out of the church. It all comes out of a certain approach to discovering God's kingdom and all of that. I don't think there's any division between science and faith in any fundamental way. I think that, like I said, I think they both point the same direction, and I'm all for it. The narrowness of our view, though, is what I'm concerned about. And it's like, okay, we understand reality through the lens of, Einstein's theory of relativity, Euclidean mathematics, Newtonian physics. Like to us, that describes pretty much base reality. We think that our story that we tell ourselves about space and time and reality itself is pretty much the complete picture. Like we pretty much think of it as that's base reality. But I think that it's probably more accurate to think of that perception as a pretty narrow view, maybe something akin to putting on, some kind of pretty limiting, crude virtual reality headset and kind of going, oh, I see, that's base reality, And so if you could go back to before the human race, because all of what I just described has made us incredibly technologically powerful, and to your argument, has flourished humanity. There's other avenues of human flourishing that we could go down. And I think it's something like, if I take this beautiful coffee coaster and I hold it here, it's pretty much everything I see. And if I'm looking at, all of our technological prowess that we've developed over the last several hundred years as a result of the Enlightenment, and that's all represented here, I do think that the reality of what's possible for us is, the rest of all this, right? And it's like we've kind of gone down the road of developing along this very narrow, limited perception, and that's made us feel incredibly powerful. But the reality of it is like if we want to travel, like Elon Musk talks about traveling to Mars, and he's mostly doing it on the coaster. Like, he's using rockets, he's using traditional, fuels in a lot of senses. He's doing a lot of stuff that, is based on the mathematics and perceptions that we know from the post-Enlightenment period. And hardcore physicists are realizing now that, what, if we want interplanetary travel and we want, maybe even intergalactic travel, we're not gonna get there doing space-time math. We have to go back to the blackboard over here and start discovering other things that aren't even on the blackboard currently. They're not part of the Newtonian, Euclidean idea of what space-time reality is, and we have to do different math. And so I think that's my caution, which is that, yeah, it's cool. Like, a lot of the stuff that's here is pretty cool. Like, I'm not poo-pooing any of that, and I'm not poo-pooing any of the advancements that it's brought in the way that it's made us, given us the ability to live, to tame nature to a great degree and to, flourish and to lift people out of abject starvation and all of that. I'm not poo-pooing any of that, but I'm just saying it's such a small dot in the whole reality in different ways that we could flourish energetically and emotionally and relationally and spiritually and all of that. Like, if we had similar growth trajectories in any of those dimensions as what we've experienced through the technology of our technology developed based on our current perception of space-time, like, what else is out there that we could truly flourish in that we don't even have any perception? So in my view, things like Instagram and all of that are pretty, like, that's a tiny speck on this coaster, right? And it's of unknown worth in terms of its long-term net benefit or whether it's a negative or positive. So I guess I'm reading John kind of puts me out here off of the coaster a little bit here. For those of you who are listening and not watching, I'm holding a little coaster in my hand to represent the totality of everything that we know in our current space-time perception. So I tend to try to think a little bit bigger and not get too enamored by what's in the current scope, and even things like AI and all of that. That's all thinking along the same technological lines as what we've been talking about. But there's people at the edge who are going outside of that and going, if we're going to solve these really big problems, we're going to have to go outside of that. We're going to have to go back to the blackboard and do some math that nobody's doing.
Yes, but don't you think, though, that it's not an either or, but rather it's the path of progress? Because has this ever happened to you? It's happened. I feel like I'm starting to kind of be aware of this, where I've just noticed it like a few times, several times in the last, I don't know, couple years. It seems like where you'll kind of present an idea or a statement or a new something that you've created, whatever it is, and when you communicate it, you think to yourself, well, geez, that was simple. Like, but to get there, you had to think this, and then you realize that part of thinking that was a little bit wrong, but that gave you an idea for this next thing, and then this next thing you test a little bit and became this, and then all of a sudden, boom, the picture was clear. And then you say it, and it's like, well, shit, that was simple. Like, that's so obvious that this probably, it's really not that profound, but it took you a little bit to get there. And then once you got there, it's just like, that all of a sudden it's kind of clear. And then you wonder how you ever did not see it to begin with, because it's so obvious. That's kind of what I think is happening with like the technological advances. We're on a path to somewhere. And, Joe Rogan has talked a time or two about like wondering if, like, what is it within us that has this drive to build stuff, this drive to progress, this drive to become better, this drive to, and, I don't know exactly what his spiritual beliefs are, but I don't think they're exactly what ours are. And, so he's thinking, is there some sort of like cruel trick that's being played on us? Or is there like, are we being controlled? Are we within a video game being controlled, and someone has, or something has planted these desires in us to progress, to build, to further, and we will spend our whole life. we will be born, and we will spend our whole life trying to make things better for ourselves and those around us. and then we will die. And I think he raises a good point, and I think he's actually onto something. But I think that thing is like the design of things. This is actually how things are supposed to work. There is a drive in us to make things better, to advance, to progress. And I kind of think like that drive at the end of the day is it's the direction of like the new heavens and the new earth. It's the direction towards the the highest good in its highest form that we're all going to experience one day. Like it feels like it's that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
part of the design to be builders. It's part of what's within us. We feel this call towards that, and we probably all get it wrong some of the time, and then probably some of us get it wrong almost all of the time, in terms of
Yeah.
motivation and drive and what we're willing to sacrifice for it and prioritize and things like that. We can definitely get caught up in the here and now and sort of miss the bigger picture. But it does seem like, so to bring it back around to technology, I love what you're saying. I'm open to it. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I wonder if it's like this is just sort of the path we have to go down, possibly to get to some of that stuff, or maybe we try some of that stuff and I don't know. I mean, I just know so little about that stuff. It seems like to me it's sort of like we haven't even started to tamper in those realms yet, but I might be wrong. But the bigger point is though that I think that, look, there was really bad things that happened in, what was it, the 30s and the 40s, and we didn't have a fraction of the technological stuff that we have now. And so I think it'd be tough to kind of point your finger at a particular technology or technological advancement in general and say that's the problem. I think the problem
Mm-hmm.
can be that sometimes. I also think there is this ability for good or evil, within each of us, and that's probably the bigger problem.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, it looks, for all the world, it looks like the 1930s are about to repeat themselves in some ways, and it's the 1930s and 40s, and it's
Yeah.
like that is so crazy. I mean, I don't actually think that's what's going to happen, but it does look that way. It's like what is in us that makes us just repeat those things? And I say we. It's hard to believe that those things are happening, atrocities that happened in the 30s and 40s, that the same things are happening today, and that could happen. It looks like more of that spirit is building again, and it's like what's going on with that? Like that was only 100 years ago, and here we, or not even. Here we are going down that same road again. It's like, and it's easy, I think, here in
Yeah.
the sitting here to go like, oh well, it's not my fault. It's happening over there. But I'm always struck by um, Solzhenitsyn talks about in the Gulag Archipelago. He discovered, when he was locked up in the Gulag unfairly, unjustly, he had a lot of time to think about what has happened to his country. That basically that the Bolsheviks have taken over, and that people like him were imprisoned in the Gulag. Like something terribly has gone wrong. What exactly has happened? He had 20 plus years to think about that. One of the things that he realized was that the fact that that was the case was as much his fault as anyone's. And he thought over his life long and hard about all the ways that he had either spoken the truth or not spoken the truth, or maybe didn't say something when he thought he should say something. And he came to the realization that his present reality, unjustly imprisoned in the Gulag in Siberia, was as much his fault as anyone's. And, I think that's a radical claim of responsibility. It's kind of a Jocko Willink radical extreme ownership kind of thing. And I think it's like whenever I'm tempted to think about what are those crazy people doing over there, like what are those crazy people, why are they that way here, think politically and all of that. Like, you know what? My present situation and the state of the world is as much my responsibility as anybody else's. That's a devastating thing to
Yeah.
really sit with, but it's true.
Yeah, it really is, and I think too that what must be said when we're talking about these things is the power of perspective, because I've noticed this too, where like I'll have really really strong opinions about something, you know, over the course of a week or two or three, kind of in a very short period of my life. And then 2 months will go by, or just 3 months will go by, and it will completely fall off my radar. And did the truth of that thing that I was caring so much about in that moment really change? Probably not. All of a sudden, I just don't really, it's not top of mind for me anymore. I really don't care that much about it anymore. So what is that? Well, it's just a difference of perspective. The truth of the situation or the things that are actually happening are still basically the same, but my perspective has changed. And this is, I think, the an important thing to remember when you really disagree with someone, which there is a place for that, for sure. I feel like that's something we shouldn't lose. We should have a category for disagreeing with someone, um, on a whole lot of things, and that's fine. But but also wondering, like, what am I not seeing that they're seeing? You know, they're not a silly person. They're not a stupid person. They're not a dumb person,
Hmm.
but they're thinking about something very differently than I am. They have a different perspective. That's mostly what it is. Now, their
Hmm.
perspective might be right or wrong, or maybe it's just, you know, it is what it is, but the difference of perspective. And I think that can, perspectives are so powerful, it can lead you to do really awful things and you think it's the right thing. That's the
Yeah.
scary thing to me. And it's not like bad things happened to the Jewish people, let's say, because that's, what you were referring to, I'm sure, 80 years, 70 to 100 years ago, and then everything went dormant and all of a sudden it popped up again in the last month. That's not what has happened. You know what I mean? Like there has been people trying to eradicate them ever since. It's not like it went away and then all of a sudden flared back up again. And and I understand the perspective that, you know, has has are some of those pains, or is any of that like um born out of a thinking that they were wronged, or some of these people were wronged, or some of them had something taken from them or something, and that has caused frustration. I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, you saw this with America too, when we went over and started bombing everything. It's that creates kind of the second and third generation of people that want to come back and kill innocent people because now they think they're doing it out of retaliation, and so the cycle continues. So these things have just been like under the surface. It's not like they went away, then all of a sudden, boom, pop back up again. Um, but are you saying, Patrick, that one way to think about "I am the way, the truth, and life" that I think I heard you say is that as you seek to live your life in congruence with the ways of God, perfectly sort of exemplified through Jesus, that you seek to live your life in that way, and as you're seeking to live your life in that way, you speak the truth about what it is you're experiencing, what it is you're seeing, what it is, what's working, what's not working, where you had a little bit wrong, and you continually sort of adjust in that way, and that basically that pathway leads to life. So then
Right.
we've covered the way, the truth, and life. Are you saying that's partly what this is saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one way to think about what this is saying. I think that um, I don't think that's an exhaustive statement, but I think that's how I've been experiencing it and how I've been perceiving it. And so just try this on, run this through your filter a bit. When, if you picture yourself back in Abraham's time and God calls you out of your father's tent, and you take your wife and you go and you leave all the luxuries and comforts of home and you go on the adventure of your life based on what God is calling you to do. And then God makes a covenant with Abraham, and he says, I know you're old and your wife is infertile, but I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to give you many descendants. Look up at the stars. I'm going to give you as many descendants as the stars. And one of the questions that Dr. Peterson asks of that story that I think is kind of interesting when it comes to talking about the way, Christ as the way, is Peterson looks at through that covenant that God made with Abraham through the lens of, let's say, maximal reproductive fitness, through the lens of Darwinian evolution. So if, through the lens of Darwinian evolution, it's survival of the fittest, it's an adaptive process. And one of the basis drives is to reproduce and to see your DNA perpetuates itself in the gene pool. Like, that's a sign of reproductive success, is if your DNA perpetuates itself maximally, across time through that lens. And Peterson posits that perhaps what God and the covenant that he's making with Abraham is something like, here is a pattern for maximal reproductive fitness across time. So if you live this way, not only do you get to reproduce and have the blessing of children and see your genetic code passed down to the next generation, but you see that like maximally across multiple generations. So here's a pattern for life that's not only good for you, but it's good for all of these people across time and into the future. And it's good for them in a way that perhaps, and this is the part that could be kind of controversial and that I'm just kind of exploring, is good for them in a way that maximizes their reproductive genetic potential, their fitness for reproducing and doing so, and their success in doing so, and creates and what's embedded in that is that there's a transference of that pattern of those values across time that continues to flourish and grow. And so perhaps one way at looking at the story of God with his people and the law and then Christ coming was, and I've already touched on the way that Christ is our example. He is our ultimate pattern for life. And, looking at through the lens of Abraham's covenant with God, and then through the lens of Christ and his resurrection, and, the covenant that God made, the obedience that God asked of Abraham to have faith, to believe, to live in this way. And, it doesn't seem to me that that's not true, that if you follow that way, if you follow the way, that in the big picture, that's what flourishes you maximally. Not only you, but it flourishes the generations that come after you. And so that you become everything that you were created to be. All of the talents and gifts and things that the potentials that live within you, when you live according to the way, those then emerge in the service of others and do so in a way that creates a story and a transference of values, so that the generations after you also multiply, fill the earth, and see the kingdom of heaven manifest in their life. Like, that blessing goes down generation after generation. And it's kind of interesting to look at that through the lens of just simple genetic, reproductive fitness, and also, of course, through the lens of, other things that are handed down. But curious what you think of that, or what that brings up.
Are you saying that he's basically positing that it has less to do with physical reproduction and more to do with the reproduction of value systems, essentially, over time?
I think both.
Would that be one way to really simplify it?
Not one or the other. I think he's saying both. Right.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you think about it, in actual physical reproduction, like, I look at that through the lens of, then where are we today in the world? Well, where we are is that, 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4 young men under the age of 30 in America, in the West, haven't had sex in the last year. Guys between 20 and 30. 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4. So they're in their prime reproductive potential phase, and they're not reproducing. So it's like they're living out a story that's not this story. We've lost the plot, and so we're not even like we're living out this maladaptive story of hyper individualism, and living out this story that, what's best for me is that my immediate hedonic pleasures are gratified in this moment. Well, that doesn't produce, what it doesn't produce any offspring, and so it doesn't produce a future, and so in some sense, like the capital W way, does produce offspring. Like, I'm not talking about universally in every case, but I'm talking about big scale here. But the fact that a third of our young men aren't reproducing, and you could look at that across the globe. You see, not just in the West, you see it certainly in the East, even more so. China and Japan, they're aging out of their populations because they didn't, their birth rate is so low and has been so low for so long. They've obviously oriented their lives in a direction that doesn't lead to maximal reproductive fitness. And
Sure.
It may be too late to turn that ship around. And those people may extinguish entirely from the planet. Once that birth rate falls below a certain level, at some point it's almost too late to turn around, and they just go extinct. So, we talked last time, we talked about what happens when you die and you didn't have eternal life, and you're extinguished, and that's it, and so that's maybe the kind of, like, if your whole people extinguish and there's no eternal life, like today, tomorrow, whenever, it's like, well, that's the opposite of what we want. Whatever the kingdom of heaven and the way and the truth and the life is, that extinguishing and ending, like, that's the opposite of that. And so, big picture, big story, that's what I'm thinking.
That is interesting, and that makes a lot of sense. And if the reproducing is not just the physical reproduction of offspring, but the reproducing and compounding of a certain value system, as that compounds over time, then those value systems will get stronger and stronger and more refined and more clear and more solidified, and they will grow exponentially because of the way numbers work. And that also, I like that way of thinking. That's helpful, because if you're thinking that the mandate to kind of flourish in a reproductive sense is not just the physical flourishing, but certainly includes it, that also sort of speaks to how you can leave a legacy during your lifetime here, because I've started to sort of question, I guess, maybe I don't want to overstate anything here, I guess. So maybe I'll just say it this way. I've started sort of to have some questions when someone seems too fixated on their legacy. Because I'm not sure that's really that helpful at the end of the day. And it seems like if you really do care about your legacy, then the best way just to go about that is to live, fully and goodly, and to love those around you and fulfill your responsibilities, and to be dependable and to be a builder. And then that's what leaves a legacy. But if you're trying to leave a legacy, it kind of feels to me like you're getting the cart before the horse a little bit, or you're focused on the wrong objective. And yeah, I don't know. I think I've just sort of, I guess if I'm really honest, I somewhat distrust some of the motivations of someone who seems really concerned about their legacy.
That's fascinating. The thing that I've been thinking about legacy is that I simply want to leave a legacy of love. I want to leave a legacy that, is love. And that when people think of me when I am no longer around, I want them to think that he loved God and he loved his family and that he walked in love. Like that's what I want people to think. And I've been clear about that for a number of years. And what's been really fun to see recently is to see that, to notice that that legacy is already taking place. So I had a conversation with my son Benjamin the other week, and he's at Vanderbilt University. He's living the dream in many ways. I mean, he's a freshman at one of the top universities in the world. He's a part of their mock trial team, and he travels to some of the other best universities in the world and competes in these mock trial events, and is getting to know people from all across the globe, and just having, his mind is just expanding, and he's learning, and it's just fantastic. It's the dream. And so we were catching up, and I was just asking him about, his experience of it all, and his, how is life and how is faith and how is all of that. And he said, Dad, you wouldn't believe how many times I get to talk about my faith and God and your faith and you and Mom's relationship and your relationship with God. And he said, I have gotten into so many conversations when we're driving long road trips full of, they drive to these mock trial events across the different parts of the country, and you're in a car with 4 or 5 of your teammates. He said, we could talk about everything, and one of the things we always end up talking about is faith and God. And he said, I'm young, I don't have the same amount of stories to share. So he said, I always end up sharing your story. And one of the kids was like, but what do you mean when you say that you live with a present awareness of God's love for you? Like, what do you mean? And so Ben's like, well, let me tell you a story. And so then he shares what he saw me go through when I went through when I came to Christ and when I was born again and when I started to walk that out. And he just, to him, like, that's the lens through which he sees, God's love, and is through the story that we lived out together in our family. And when I'm sitting on the porch and he's telling me about this, like, to me, that's the legacy. It's like to know that my son is driving across the country and is talking to people about what God has done in his life and in my life and in our lives as a family. Like, that's the only legacy that I could possibly want. And, those conversations that I have with my kids like that, like, that's the richest thing that I could have in life in terms of legacy, is that. And so I don't have to wait, I don't have to be overly obsessed about my legacy. I can be intentional about it, but that intention is paying dividends already, and that I see that my legacy is about the Father and about the Father's business. And that's so rich that it makes me cry, and that's all I really want.
Yeah. Well, that's the perfect example, because what I see with that is that you're living your life in the way that you best know how. You're trying to do what's right. You're trying to do things that draw you into goodness. And guess what? The byproduct of that is leaving a great legacy. So, but you're going to have both. But, what I'm not hearing you say is that you're sort of fixated and trying to orchestrate and manipulate a certain way for people to remember you by.
Yeah.
You're just living your life based on your convictions. And of course that's going to leave a legacy, and to me, that's very different.
Yep. Yeah. I see that.
So, hey, okay. Why did we stop recording?
Looks to me like we're...
What's it say on your end?
Says we're still recording here on my end.
Really? It's not saying that on my end. That's weird. Okay, so you're still showing recording?
Yeah. What
All right.
changed on your
Browser not allowing to record. Your browser is not allowing Riverside to save to disk. What should I do?
I wonder.
Well, one thing that's a little concerning is my battery keeps dropping, and now I'm at 11%. I'm plugged in, but
It might be
browser not allowing to record. Your browser is not allowing Riverside to record to disk. I wonder if it's because my storage is full, or
it could be. But we've had a good conversation. We could just call it and then take.
yeah, we could just see where it. We could just have a hard end on this thing. we could,
I'm assuming that mine. I think mine is recording everything, and so when the file will be good. But
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone out there is still hearing us, Chris, when you're doing the edits of this thing, if you can just cut all this out. If you're not going to hear it, there's nothing to cut out, and if you do hear it, then we're good. So yeah,
Yep.
why don't we just bring an end to this thing, Patrick? And
yeah, that was
back up some other time. How about that?
Yes, thanks for going through John 14 with me. That's kind of what's been whirling around my brain. Appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's a whole lot more here to talk about.
Yeah,
I
I
wanted to
guess
hear
we
some
could.
examples of I wanted to hear some examples from you on kind of some of the ways you're experiencing in life, that some of the ways of the way, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about that some other time.
Let's do that next time.
All right. Well, this has been fun as always, dude. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And if people are still hearing us, thanks for listening, and tune back in next time.
Yep. Thanks. See you.
All right. See you guys.
Try to catch me howling at the moon.